Friends, welcome to Experian Live, a show featuring leaders talking about technology, innovation, and ways to improve business. Today, we're chatting with Nick Barratt about fraud and the business of account takeovers. Nick Barratt is a senior manager of financial crime at PricewaterhouseCoopers. And before we get started, I want to let you know that the latest Experian fraud report is available, and the URL to get the free download is at ex.pn/fraud report. Again, the URL is just ex.pn/fraud report. Nick, thank you so much for being on our show today.
No worries, Mike. It's good to be here, and glad I can be of some assistance.
Awesome. So Nick, before we get into this, can you share a little bit about your background and how you found your way into working in financial crime?
Yeah, so I started off actually in IT security about 20 years ago. And so then it was all about building up the castle walls, protecting everything from external people. From there, moved into cybersecurity and did a lot of work around dark web research, industrialization of hacking and that type of stuff. And then from there, actually came to work for Experian and really followed the shift in cybercrime and how cybercrime leads to financial crime, and more specifically fraud. And then from there, spent 12 months working for a bank, heading up their financial crime strategy and technology. And most recently moved into PwC, where I act as a consultant working with a range of financial services organizations to help them protect themselves against the impact of financial crime.
When you were focused on cybercrime, how is that different from what you're doing now? What sorts of tasks were you doing back then?
So the way that I would explain it and keep it nice and simple, cybersecurity and cybercrime is about bits and bytes, whereas financial crime is about dollars and cents. Basically. So one ultimately leads to the other. Most notably, cybercrime or cybersecurity incidents lead to financial crime losses. One's really focused on the data and how that data can be monetized. And the fraud or the financial crime is the monetization of that data.
Are there any projects you can speak about that when you're working just on cybercrime that were really interesting to you?
So I think it's the prevalence of attacks that really is most interesting to me when I was doing that. So for the organization I work for, we actually set up a number of honeypots in China. And this was a time, as still today, there's a lot of state-sponsored espionage. And like anything, a Western company pretending to be on the ground in China is going to attract attention from the Chinese government. But it was really interesting to see the handoff procedure in terms of the way that they conducted an attack. So being able to watch an attack in real time shows you that these organizations, now that was state sponsored, but very much, rings true for other, types of criminal gangs, that they have different types of capability within it, just like we would have different types of capability within our businesses. And those organizations will hand off hacking types and activities through their organization, and you could see that through monitoring these attacks. I think the other thing that's quite prevalent is really just around, and we keep talking about this a lot, is the prevalence of malware and botnets, and how those are still used to conduct all manner of crimes. Now, statistics back then that we saw, again through running these honeypots, is if you put a new device on the internet with no antivirus or malware protection, it will be scanned from the internet within 12 seconds.
Whoa, 12 seconds.
12 seconds. So, and we're talking about billions of devices on the internet, especially, with the Internet of Things. And and you can see why now all of these companies that are offering, internet connected devices, smart TVs, smart fridges,
Yeah.
smart kettles, these are all devices that are being recruited into these botnets.
That's fascinating. Okay, so you mentioned the term honeypots several times. My mind
Yeah.
immediately went to Winnie the Pooh. What is a
Okay.
honeypot?
So a honeypot is a deliberate trap used within cybersecurity or financial crime prevention, where you put a target, a soft target on the internet that is deliberately um, exposed so that you can garner information and intelligence about your adversaries.
So can you give me like an example of that? Maybe something I might have seen?
Um, so let's from a military perspective, a good
Hmm.
idea might be sending fake messages to send the enemy off the scent, as it were.
Hmm.
So um, effectively, you're putting something out, allowing it to be attacked, but because it's a dummy target, you'll gather far more intelligence about the people that are attacking you and how they might attack you by capturing this information.
Oh, that's fascinating. So, like an example might be like the military sets up some sort of database that is meant to be found by the enemy,
Yeah.
and the goal is
Yes.
basically to have them get it access, and then through that we're getting intelligence on them.
Yeah. Correct. So in a financial crime perspective, you might set up a fake internet banking site and make it deliberately weak, or less secure than it would usually be, and allow cyber criminals to attack it so that you can gain intelligence on the malware that they're using or the techniques that they're using, maybe through cross-site scripting or something else to breach the security within the site, so that you can use that information to harden your actual proper internet
Wow.
banking.
Oh wow, that's fascinating. So over the years, as you have like, especially in the cybercrime area, are there any things that you saw that you were like, wow, that's really, really smart? That's a really interesting tactic that they're using.
Um, so the one that I mentioned, which is clearly
Hmm.
clearly skills based. So these organisations will have um, different capabilities within their team. So you're gonna have your privates, who are out, who are doing the initial reconnaissance and data finding and some initial low level work. But then when they get up against a barrier, they're going to pass it over to a lieutenant or someone higher up the food chain that's got a little bit more skills, that is going to then do the next part of the attack, and then all the way through to the really senior guy that has much more skills in his arsenal. That once they've really got through, this is the guy that steps up to the plate when the bases are loaded and
Mm.
hits the ball out of the stadium. He's your money man, and that to me, still, I'm still surprised at the complexity that these organisations go to, and the resources that they can recruit. These aren't guys just sitting in their bedroom, doing it for fun or doing it for their own personal gain. These are well organised, you businesses in their own right. They
Mm.
just make their money through illicit, illegal activity, um, and they will put back in the money that they make for R&D and things like that. So I think that's a critical play here, in that these organisations are sophisticated. And I think the other one that always shocks me is the persistence of these individuals and how long they're prepared to play the waiting game. I used to work for. I did some work around forensic investigations, and these organizations, these individuals will sit and will monitor inside of networks for months, if not years. Look at the TJX incident, when they had all that card data stolen a few years ago now. But those cyber criminals were in that network for 18 months, were moving their way around, trying to locate where the data stores are, trying to locate where the data is that they want to steal. So they're prepared to play a waiting game. I was at an event just last week and was talking to someone, and he was saying that today data, personal identifiable information that's stolen through cyber attacks, we're finding out now that these criminals are sitting on data for up to 3, 4, 5 years, and actually the longer that they sit on it, the more valuable it becomes.
That's so scary, because you would think that after some sort of breach or crime like that, you're going to be hyper vigilant about checking, your bank accounts, your whatever accounts that were breached. You're going to be staring at that at that for a while. But then, like, a year passes, 2 year passes. To your point, you become a little bit more, oh, I feel protected. I feel like nothing's going to happen to me. But you're saying that kind of the longer the data sits out there, the more comfortable people get, that's when the attacks are most likely to happen.
Exactly. And the fact of the matter is, right, once our data's stolen, we can't really do anything about it. We can't change our name. People generally don't tend to change their email address. They don't move address very often, and even if they do, the cyber criminals have still got their previous addresses, or are, in your case, your social security numbers, they don't change. That's your social security number for life. So so once a lot of this data's out there, it is valuable as long as you continue to be alive.
That is scary. So so you were in the cybercrime space for a long time, and you said a lot of that is like focusing on the data aspect of it. And then you transitioned to focus specifically on financial crime. What was your draw there? Why did you make that switch over?
So I think cybersecurity was starting to mature, right? And organizations that held a lot of data, retailers, hospitals, government institutions, were starting to get their act together from a cybercrime perspective, and were starting to get their defenses much better aligned. However, what I saw was that wasn't transitioning into the financial crime prevention space. Organizations were still looking at traditional types of financial crime, first party fraud, committed by an individual, against a financial institution, and that they weren't connecting the dots that data stolen, at a consumer facing business might result in fraud to them, and they just didn't have the right understanding, risk awareness of that. So I really wanted to come into that space and help educate the community that they needed to elsewhere much wider than where they were today.
What have you found, Nick, as being one of the big challenges of educating the community as technology evolves?
I think it still shocks me that there are so many people that work in financial crime and fraud that don't appreciate the scope and the complexity of fraud attacks. Fraud attacks that take place. In the UK, last year, and these were some stats from and actually a report that was released yesterday. 31% of all crime now in the UK is fraud. And that goes from
Mm.
anything from traditional boiler room scams or dating app scams, or the Nigerian prince letters, all the way
Hmm.
through to quite highly sophisticated um, internet banking and account takeover incidents, and everywhere in between. And it's the loss to the industry and to the economy is significant. And the unfortunate situation is that it continues to grow.
When I think about the first kind of fraud types that you mentioned, the especially like the dating app ones, those seem to be very, very manual, where someone's having to build a relationship with somebody else through emailing, through conversations, video chats, whatever, through some sort of dating app, where the whole goal is really to build trust with that person and eventually try to get money out of that person. It seems like a very manual task. Are you noticing that as fraud gets more sophisticated, that's becoming less manual, more bots, more technologies involved, or is it just as the same amount of manpower, woman power is
Um,
needed?
so I think ultimately it comes down to how big is the target,
Mm.
and how much research do you want to put into it. So if you want to commit a highly sophisticated um, scam that's potentially worth a lot of money, then you're going to have to put time and effort into it. And the cyber criminals are persistent enough that they'll do that. I think the benefit that they have, right, and think back, you know 15, 20 years ago. If I wanted to commit a crime against an individual, I would have to go through quite a lot of processes to find out enough information to commit that fraud. I might have to go down to the registry office, to try and get a copy of a wedding certificate. I
Mm.
might have to go down to the county offices to get information about property records or business records, or that type of thing. And well, guess what? Today, all of that's digitized. It's all on the internet. So I don't even have to get changed out of my pajamas. I can sit at home and I can build, you know, a database on someone. And with social media, that adds even more power to that. And I know you had a recent um, Experian Live on phishing. Those are precursors to other type. That's a precursor to other types of financial crime events. And the information that I can use to make my phishing emails, uh, or letters or phone calls, far more sophisticated, is easy for me to find. But it's not just digital means and mechanisms. In the UK, um, there are still people still get scammed by physical mail coming through the door,
Mm.
and a lot of this is being sent from overseas. And I think whilst as a consumer community, people still continue to fall for this.
Mm.
People will still continue to, try and exploit them.
Yeah, and I think about gosh, the it's really sad to see the mail fraud that's happening, the letters, postcards, things that are being sent out in the attempt to get money out of people. Um, and yeah, that's the offline method. You're using some online data to then use an offline method to try to scam people.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it is sad that you look at you know these instances of fraud that occur, and it's not just financial loss, right? It's we've got a big push at the moment globally on like mental health,
Mm.
and the impact that a financial loss could have on someone's mental health. But all the way through to instances where people have committed, sadly committed suicide as a result of,
Mm.
being scammed. So, it has much, much deeper connotations to individuals, but also the fact that, this financial crime that's being committed, right? Yeah, it goes out the country initially, but it comes back in, but the money doesn't come back in as money. It comes back in through people trafficking, or the sex trade, or drugs, and these criminal gangs, they're multifaceted. They the dark web version of a Walmart, if you will. They've got lots of different things that they're selling and peddling, and they'll make money wherever they can make money.
Gee whiz. Nick, you mentioned account takeovers, and can you talk a little bit about what that means and what that looks like, how people can recognize what an account takeover is?
Yeah, so I generally tend to classify account takeover into two parts. The first part is a direct account takeover, whereby through either phishing or manipulating your details, or potentially using a stolen username and password that maybe I bought from the dark web, I get direct access to one of your accounts. Now, that could be a financial account, but that could also be a social media account or an email account. The account itself doesn't really matter to me. Or you have what I would term as indirect account takeover. So this is where I'm socially engineering you to make payments out of your account to an account that I have access to. So more recently, that's often come by the name of CEO fraud, or authorized push payment fraud, where effectively you're manipulating someone else to effectively control. You're effectively using them to control that account and get money out of it.
Can you give me an example of that? Like how that happens, how someone can be manipulated like that to hand over that information?
Yeah, so let's say you're the finance director of a large organization. So I might research on Facebook. I might get your details. Typically, your email address generally is going to be pretty easy to guess. First name dot last name at yourorganization.com, or maybe first initial plus your last name. So generally emails follow a pretty standard format. But again, I can ring into your reception and get that pretty easily. So what I'm then going to do is drop you an email and say, hey Mike, lovely dinner I had with you and your wife Anne the other day. The stew that we had was great. And I really enjoyed that bottle of Shiraz that you got out of the cupboard for us. As you know, I'm away on business now for a couple of days, but I've completely forgot that I've got to get some money sent over to a charity who I promised that I'd have the money in their account this morning. Here's all the details, their bank account number and their routing code. Can you ensure that you get $10,000 over to them this morning, and I'll speak to you when I get back. So it's that level of intimacy that you can build up through what has been shared on social media, and that really, I think, for me is the killer today, in that we don't, both from a business perspective and a personal perspective, link the two together, and how what I put in my personal life could be used to manipulate me at work. And something like that, you've got knowledgeable details, and it's gonna the criminals are sophisticated enough that the email is going to look like it's coming from the CEO. And would the finance director even pick up the phone and ring and ask him and say, you sure you want me to make this payment?
Wow. That is crazy. That's crazy. I never knew that it was even happening.
Yeah, and I think, the that's that's the CEO. Now, you think about that in the case of an ordinary ordinary individual. um some of us that are a little bit more security minded probably don't go sharing their information on Facebook left, right, and center. But there's people that I see. You log on, and every day you're going to see someone that's posted a picture of the meal that they're eating, and or linking themselves in a location with the person that they're with. And all of that information can be used to socially engineer someone, either directly or indirectly, to get access to their accounts.
Wow. I can even see, like, we finished this data talk and potentially I got an email from a Nick Barratt. Hey, Mike, great chatting about account takeover and Facebook Live, blah, blah, blah. Hey, my son's going to be in this upcoming race and we're looking for sponsorships. Could you potentially, throw a couple bucks his way? And I'm thinking I'm donating to your son's charity or fundraiser. In reality, it's just a big scam.
Yeah, totally. And that again is another type of account takeover. That if I get into your social media account, I can facilitate that type of attack to your associates, and people that you're friends with, or
Oh,
the things in LinkedIn. So an account takeover doesn't necessarily mean a business account. It can mean another type of account. And fraudsters are very good at making money from or building that building those links to get what they want at the end of the day. And they can very, very easily move, um, and know, right, well, if I get this piece of data, that'll help me get that piece of data, and that will help me get that, and then that's when I can cash out. So it's all planned, well rehearsed. They're not just going straight for the prize. They're planning what they want, and
mm.
they'll play that out.
Wow, that is fascinating. Um, when we were chatting on the phone before today's show, you talked about cross account takeovers. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that would that that would be in a situation whereby I would get access to, let's say, your email account, and then I would use your email account to do something to another account that would then allow me to take over that other account. So let's take an example, and this is one that everyone will be familiar with. You log on, now. Most uh, organizations that have a consumer facing portal, whether that be a retailer or an airline, will ask you for a username. Now, most of them support email address as username, because guess what? We all remember our email addresses.
That's right.
So it's a pretty good assumption, right? That if I'm asking for a username, I'm typing in my email address. So emails publicly available. Loads and loads get breached in attacks. So well, I'll just try this. So I type in an email, and I then type in effectively a junk password. It doesn't at that point really matter what it is. I type in that junk password, and I basically get an error message back saying your username and password, or the password doesn't align to this user account. Please try again, or click here if you've forgotten your password. So I click on the link to say I've forgotten my password. I've got access to your Gmail or your Hotmail, and so I click on that. I get an email come through saying, please reset your password. Oh, and by the way, if this isn't you that's done that, please contact us. Well, guess what? I've got access to the email account, so I click on the link, I reset the password, and then I delete that message out of the email account. So the owner of that is completely unaware that it's taken place. And guess what? I've then got access to, I've reset the password on your mobile phone account. I can then use that to request a new SIM. And then from that, I can download your bank's internet banking app. And guess what? I can get a new 6-digit security code sent via SMS to the new SIM that I've ordered, and bang, I'm in your account. So that a connected account takeover is really what I referred to before about jumping from one account to another to ultimately facilitate the fraud.
Nick, as we see more companies beginning to use biometric data, things like my phone, I can turn it on with my thumbprint. I'm beginning to. I was sharing with you on our phone call that when I call up my investment account for retirement, they were asking me recently, "Would you like to be able to authenticate who you are through voice?" And and then we see this increase in voice technology and people being able to use voice assistants to be able to log into financial accounts. Are you? I'm kind of curious in your view on that, on how biometric data might be leveraged by fraudsters, and specifically around voice, because that to me concerns me. I've always said no because I'm like, well, someone maybe can replicate my voice and be able to have access, but I'm wondering like, is biometric data, voice, kind of like the same kind of data points as a username and password?
Yeah, so I think a lot of these technologies are really good. However, the weak point in whatever you use, I mean, two-factor authentication is secure and is a strong technology. The challenge that you have with all of this is the enrollment of the individual into that scheme. And how do you verify someone's identity when they enroll? So if I come along and say, "Hey, I'm Mike Delgado, and I want to use my thumbprint to access my bank account through my phone." Well, firstly, I'm tying that thumbprint to my phone itself. It doesn't
Yeah.
ever link back to the bank itself. So all that I'm doing is just associating my thumbprint with that device. Now, what the bank's done in the background is a number of typically knowledge-based checks to ensure that the phone is associated with you because you've passed those knowledge-based checks. Therefore, if the thumbprint is displayed because you own the phone, the thumbprint must belong to you, which is a little bit nonsensical in some ways. I mean, but it's the same with voice, right? You set up voice access so that you can make money transfers via Alexa or Google Assistant or whatever, and you're still only tying the voice to the identity of that individual based upon them passing either a series of knowledge-based questions or keying in a one-time passcode that you've sent them to facilitate that. Ultimately, are you truly verifying that the biometric that you have, or the voice that's being presented is that individual? No. And coming back to your question on the using these voice assistants, those organizations, those technologies don't do any detection capability. So if you're allowing your bank account and payments to be made by a third party, well, who's actually then responsible for the security of that? Is that the provider? So the Googles of the world, or Amazons, or is it the bank, or is it me as a consumer? And I think that isn't particularly clear Certainly in the situations that I've seen where that technology is attempted to be used.
Mm. Yeah, it's just interesting how as technology evolves, there's more and more data points, and the goal really is to make sure that the individual who wants to make a financial transaction or whatever data transfer is that actual individual, whether it's through those identifying questions that could be answered only by that individual or by facial recognition, voice, whatever it is. Like the whole goal here is to try to remove fraud. Um, what you're saying is there's a lot of still questions around if fraud happens, who's at fault? Is it the device that you're using? Is it the uh, is it the bank? Like who's really going to be at fault here?
Yeah, and I agree, and I think this is why, in my opinion, we need to have a sort of fundamental shift in the way that we look at fraud prevention, right? Data points allow us much greater insight than we've ever had about individual activity, right? And we penalize and we say, oh, Big Brother watching, and why Facebook and stuff collecting all this data and stuff. But actually, if you look at it in a financial crime context, it's like, well, if I could take those data points and build a pattern of how Nick, lives his life and how he operates, financially, then actually I can build up a pretty good profile of what Nick does. Nick
Yeah,
buys a train ticket once a month. Nick, generally tends to shop at these, types of organisation. He generally, spends his money at this time of day and that time of day. He generally uses these limited selection of ATMs, and guess what? Those ATMs are either close to where he lives or close to where he works. So if I can understand what good looks like
yeah,
and build a buffer around that, the minute that I try and make an ATM withdrawal from the centre of Paris when it's a Tuesday and I should be sat in the office in London, well, that's abnormal behaviour. So I might put a block on that, and I might then look to step up the challenge. The problem is we're so focused historically in financial crime prevention of trying to look for the bad, that as the fraudsters get more sophisticated and can better merge themselves in with good traffic, spotting the bad becomes harder and harder to do. So it's almost you end up chasing your tail, right? Or looking for a needle in an ever increasing haystack. Whereas actually, if we can identify, well, that's how Nick generally operates. So for Nick, that that transaction is outside of his normal pattern of behavior, I'm going to challenge it. Now, if I challenge it and I get it wrong,
yeah,
so we'll take it. We'll take it on the chin. But
yeah,
actually, 9 times out of 10, I'm actually going to be right. And the more that I do that, and the more that I look for good, the actual better the you know the behavioural profiling is going to be, and the more effective my outcomes are going to be, and that has a significant impact both in the reduction of costs of technology to detect fraud, um, analyst time and analyst resource. It reduces the amount of false positives that we have to deal with, and ultimately it will reduce the overall exposure to a business and individuals of fraud.
yeah. That actually comforts me. Like I guess the more data points they have about me, like knowing that Mikey likes to use coupons, he likes to save money. He usually lives in this circle. This is where a lot of his transactions happen. And if all of a sudden there's some weird financial request being made that's not in the norm, like I want that flagged. Like I would appreciate that phone call and why that's being rejected until they verify. So that's something that actually, you know, the downside is there could be a minor inconvenience, but who cares? Like if you're protecting my finances, I'd want you to stop it and ask me.
Yeah, very, very much so. And there was a very interesting landmark case here in the UK within the last month where, I mean, it's been going on for 12 to 18 months, but a lady was hit by a scam. She had a small business account. She lost close to $350,000
Oh.
out of this account, and she effectively took the bank in question to court. And whilst the financial ombudsman took a significant amount of time to rule on the case, they eventually found in her favour, and she had argued that the bank in question should have had better security and detection controls to effectively pick up on this type of fraud. And they were ordered by the ombudsman to pay back all the money in full. Now, they had recovered around about a quarter of what had been stolen. So, whilst it was effectively, she'd been instructed again through one of these, scams to transfer the money out. She ruled that the bank should have had better controls in place to look at the destination, to be able to have identified that it was, a fraudulent account that wasn't connected. And yeah, they were ordered to repay it. So what does that mean in terms of the future? Are more and more individuals that have effectively been duped gonna are gonna be able to go and claim the money back from the bank, because the expectation is that the bank should have those controls in place to stop that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you, like, sometimes the most devious fraud for me is the one where I think it's coming from the institution that I actually bank with or do business with. And I shared the example in the last show around my web host provider sent me a note saying that the host there was a data breach that happened, and it said, make sure you sign in right away and just authenticate your site. We know that you're there. You got our message. And so I immediately I looked at the email. I had like the logo of the web host, had all the details I'd expect. And I immediately, just like out of fear, I'm like, oh my gosh, something got hacked. I need to protect my site. I clicked on the link, and next thing you know, I'm like, what did I just do? I just logged into a unsecure website and gave my username and password to a third party, and thankfully I got it resolved. But that kind of freaked me out. And then a couple months later, I got a phone call from my bank and saying that there was a financial transaction that was happening, and I needed to verify whether that was a true charge. And it kind of freaked me out. And then I was like, well, I don't know if I'm really talking to the bank. And so then I hung up the phone. Then I called up the phone number that I had on my card to make sure that I'm actually talking to the bank. And in that case, it was legitimately the bank calling me. But now I'm just really on guard because I was taking advantage of. And so now, like, whenever I get a phone call from a bank or anybody, I will never give information over the phone unless I'm making the phone call and I know the number that I dialed.
Yeah, no, and I would concur with that, and certainly I would certainly encourage that behaviour. But I mean, to your point, I'm going to show you this on my other phone, and
okay, yeah,
hopefully, we might be able to see it, but or it might be backwards. But this basically is a text message that I got out of the blue about what are we 3 months ago now.
yeah.
I'll read it to you, and it basically says DVLA. So the DVLA in the UK is the Driver and Vehicle Licensing Agency. So it issues all of the driver's licenses and all of your vehicle tax for the road. And it basically says, we have identified that you still have an outstanding vehicle tax refund from an overpayment. Please follow to process. And the email that's given is https://gov.uk-refund.com.
Sounds totally legitimate with that URL there.
But the URL, when you know what you're looking for, is fake, because it's basically it's a .com site. It's not a .gov site in the UK. And it is gov.uk uk-refund.com. So
Oh,
the dot in there is actually part of the name. And yeah, it's a phishing site, and clearly, people will fall for it. They'll log on, they'll put in their details, and I mean
yeah.
that could be, that might even be your government, government passwords that they're asking for, and clearly that then would give them access to your tax returns and
Mm.
all of that. So so as we touched on, persistent, creative, and they'll play on the fact that people will get it, and like you did, they'll react instantaneously without pausing for thought. And if they do, it'll only be after the event and go, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe I shouldn't have done that."
Yeah, it's that
I'm
fear-based stuff that really makes you take action because you're like, I need to protect myself, and you just
Yeah,
like click on the link.
yeah, and I mean, that's quite a rare one. But I mean, I've had several from pretending to be Apple. Oh, you've got to reset your Apple ID, or can you log back in again because we've had an issue with your account. So, again, they're preying on, it's a numbers game, right? If I get 100,000 phone numbers, I might get 1,000 people click on, but 1,000 people against 100,000 numbers is probably a good return.
Hmm. So what, Nick, as you've been studying all this and tracking it, what are things that organizations can do to protect their clients, and and also what are things that consumers can do to make sure that we're being vigilant about taking precautions?
So I'll start with the consumer one first. So you know education is critical, right? And fraudsters are only going to get ever more sophisticated as they get access to more money, and they put that in. It allows them to make even more complex scams. So I generally tend to live by the if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Um, and um, don't accept anyone that you don't know for who they say they are. Always have that element of suspicion. Take five, think about it before you just jump into something. Do your research. Do if you're unsure, do a Google scam. Do a Google search, for scams. Or as you said, if you get a strange text message or an email, pick up the phone, ring the supposed sender on the number that you find from the internet, and confirm it with them. Would you have sent this out? Is this the type of correspondence you would have sent out? And generally, if you're still unsure and you can't confirm, I would ignore it, because if someone really wants to get hold of you to do something, then they'll try, and they'll try again, and they'll try again, and then generally, if it's a scam, you'll get it once, and you won't hear back. So that's on the consumer side. On the business side, I think, again, education is critical, education of staff, and making sure the staff do get the right level of training to help them understand what uh, what is happening, and also what's going to happen in the future as well, and trying to be a little bit more forward looking. Collaboration and trying to work with other peer organisations and cross-sector organisations, I think, is critical. You've all got a lot of data that you can share, and that data is certainly very helpful in spotting abnormalities and helping to fight crime. I think there can certainly be a mindset shift in terms of how we look at fraud. And as I said, can we use that data to actually build up a profile of individuals and what good behavior looks like within the business? We are humans and we are creatures of habit. And if we can build up and understand, what that good activity is, then anything that's abnormal becomes far, far easier to spot. And I think finally, is really understanding what the risk is actually to our business, and making sure that we understand that culturally, from a jurisdictional perspective, and also, based upon, the products and services that we're offering to our clients. I think too many organizations make a broad, sweeping assumption of where their fraud risks are going to be. But actually, if you're operating multinationally, that's going to differ from country by country. I mean, in Ireland, you can only have, well, you have to pay to have a credit card. You have to pay to have an account, a bank account. Therefore, there's less, there's less prevalence of that type of activity. So you certainly see, more account takeovers and that type of thing than you would do applications for new credit cards and stuff, because people don't generally like to do that. Again, in Germany, it's a very anti-debt society. They don't like credit, so they don't want to put themselves into this like situation of borrowed debt. So there's a lot more cash. There's a lot more instant-based payments than you would find in the UK. So you need to understand what good and bad looks like in the context also of the countries that you're operating in. And I still think businesses don't really have a true handle on that.
Well, I mean, all the different examples you've shared, the very creative ways that fraudsters are looking to deceive people, and as technology evolves, they're just getting more and more creative. And so I want to thank you, Nick, for sharing these various ways with us, so that we can all be have a better protect ourselves as consumers as well as organizations. Thank you so much for sharing your advice. For those listening in that want to keep up with the work that you're doing, what's the best way for them to follow you?
So probably LinkedIn, and you'll find me on LinkedIn under Nicholas Barratt, or we can distribute details afterwards. My contact details at PwC.
Okay, wonderful. And for those interested in learning more about fraud, the latest Experian fraud report just came out. And if you'd like to get the free download, the short URL is just ex.pn/fraud report. Again, that's ex.pn/fraud report, or you can just do a Google search for Experian fraud report, and you'll find it there. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
Mike, it's been great talking. Thanks very much.
Thank you.